I spent my life baking bread to feed my family, and they paid me back with betrayal. That night, when the fire rose through my house, I didn't run. I watched every lie turn to ashes. People call it tragedy. But for me, it was the moment I was reborn from the flames' rain, whispered against the cedar roof, soft as secrets. Inside, the sourdough starter bubbled quietly on the counter, alive, loyal, unlike the man whose key just scraped the lock. Edward Hale stepped in shaking droplets from his gray overcoat. "Long night," he muttered. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The faint scent of violet perfume drifted in with him, sweet, foreign, expensive. Maggie froze, mid-motion flower still on her hands. Violet. She hadn't worn violet since her mother's funeral. She tried to speak, but the house had forgotten how to make sound. Only the clock ticked relentless, a heartbeat of truth. 40 years of rhythm, rise, bake, love, repeat, now threatened by a single unfamiliar fragrance. Edward loosened his tie. "The investors from Seattle kept me late," he said, pouring whiskey instead of explaining more. Maggie smiled thinly. "You must be exhausted." He nodded, eyes averted, and trudged upstairs. The stairs creaked like confessions under his weight. When the bedroom door closed, Maggie stood alone among the dough bowls and fading warmth. Rain slid down the window pane like tears too polite to fall. She inhaled violet again, and something inside her chest tilted off balance. She picked up his jacket. In the pocket, a folded receipt, damp, crumpled, faintly scented. Not from Seattle. Not even close. Her breath hitched. The clock ticked louder, the dough kept rising, and outside, the rain thickened into a steady Portland curtain. Maggie looked toward the stairs. "All right," she whispered to no one, voice steady, but eyes bright with stormlight. "If there's truth in this house, I'll find it." The house slept heavy under the Portland rain. Maggie couldn't. She sat at the edge of the bed, the silence thick as unbaked dough. Edward snored beside her, steady, practiced, almost smug. His phone buzzed once on the nightstand screen, flashing pale blue in the dark. She hesitated, fingers hovering. 40 years of trust rose like a wall inside her, then crumbled. She unlocked it. The message glowed, bright, cruel, and simple. "You were incredible tonight, Dad." Her stomach knotted. Dad. Her mind tried to rearrange it into something innocent. A mistake. A friend joking. But the heart emoji sat there, a mocking drop of red. The sender's address was a string of random letters, untraceable. She scrolled, no previous messages, no name saved. Just that one. A ghost confession. Maggie's breath came short, sharp. She took a screenshot, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped the phone. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed a sound suddenly menacing. The house felt foreign, like a stranger's home wearing her wallpaper. She tiptoed to the kitchen phone, pressed to her chest as if it were evidence from a crime scene. Edward's jacket still hung over the chair. She touched it, careful, and that same faint perfume bloomed again, violet and sin. Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. She'd spent her life kneading pain into patience, turning grief into bread. But this was raw betrayal. She placed the phone on the table, opened her notebook, and wrote 2 words in small, perfect handwriting: "Find proof." The clock chimed midnight. Outside, a passing train wailed across the Willamette like a warning. Upstairs, Edward shifted in his sleep. "Maggie," he mumbled. She blew out the kitchen light. "Sleep, Ed," she whispered, voice flat as marble. Then she stared at the glowing phone again, the red heart still burning on the screen, and whispered to herself, "I'm done pretending I don't see." Morning came gray and cold. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, but Maggie barely tasted it. She moved like a ghost through her own house, the red heart from that email still flickering in her mind, like a wound that refused to close. Edward's jacket still hung on the chair from the night before. She reached into its inside pocket again, her breath shallow. Her fingertips brushed against paper, smooth, thick, expensive. A folded receipt. She unfolded it carefully. Riverside Ember Resort, Hood River. Dinner for 2. a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, her favorite vintage from their 10th anniversary. A sweet number printed neatly on the bottom. Not Seattle, not investors. A lie. Her knees weakened, but she didn't fall. Instead, she took out her phone, laid the receipt on the counter, and snapped a photo. Evidence clean and silent. Then she smoothed the paper flat and slipped it back into his jacket exactly as it was. The bakery bell chimed faintly in her memory, the small bronze bell at Hale Sourdough that once meant life, joy, routine. Today it sounded like a countdown. She drove through the drizzle to a downtown office, the wipers brushing away the world every 2 seconds. Inside the soft yellow light of Harriet Klein's law office wrapped her in reluctant safety. Harriet, her friend, her confidant, the woman who'd helped her register the bakery decades ago, looked up in surprise. "Maggie," she said gently, "you look pale." "What's wrong?" Maggie laid the photo on the desk without a word. Harriet's eyes flicked down, reading fast. "He lied again." "Worse," Maggie replied. "And I think it's someone close. Someone I'd never imagine." Harriet exhaled slowly. "Do you want me to recommend someone discreet, private investigation background check?" Maggie nodded, voice like crushed glass. "Yes, I need truth before I lose my sanity." Outside, the Columbia River shimmered under low clouds, reflecting the bruised sky. Maggie stood by the window, fingers tapping the cold glass. "I built a business from flour and fire," she whispered. "I can rebuild a life from ashes if I have to." Harriet handed her a card. Kira Moss Investigations and Evidence Recovery. Maggie slid it into her wallet beside a worn photo of her wedding day. White lace golden smiles. Promises that now felt counterfeit. As she stepped out into the wind, she tightened her scarf and muttered, "You wanted secrets, Ed. Let's see how long you can keep them." The rain started again. Harder this time, like applause for a performance about to begin. The cafe was quiet, except for the hiss of milk and the rain tapping the window like impatient fingers. Portland's Pearl District shimmered in gray light, hip, artistic, indifferent to heartbreak. Maggie sat by the window, hands folded, waiting. A woman approached, trenchcoat half wet, auburn hair, tied back eyes sharp as glass. Mrs. Hale. Maggie nodded. "You must be Kira Moss." Kira slid into the seat opposite, ordered nothing. Harriet said, "You needed clarity, not comfort." Her voice carried the weight of experience, too calm, too steady. Maggie pushed the envelope across the table, the photo of the receipt, the screenshot of the email, a picture of Edward. "He's hiding something. I need to know what, who." Kira flipped through the papers with surgical precision. "Married 40 years, 41 next spring, and you're sure he's seeing someone?" Maggie hesitated. "I'm sure he's lying." Kira leaned back. "All right. I'll start tonight. I'll check his routes, digital traces, maybe his car's GPS history. If there's something, you'll have it within 48 hours. Maggie's eyes searched the rain outside. "And if there's nothing, then you'll sleep again." Kira gathered the documents, slipped them into a waterproof folder, then looked up one last time. "One thing, Mrs. Hale. When people come to me, they think truth will free them. It doesn't. It burns." Maggie met her gaze unflinching. "Then I'll stand in the fire." Kira's expression softened just enough for a brief, respectful nod. "You'll get my call." She left as quietly as she'd come, fading into the drizzle, like part of the city itself. Maggie lingered, watching her reflection blur against the wet glass. Outside, a streetcar clanged past, scattering light across puddles. For a moment, she saw her own face doubled in the window, one side calm, the other already unraveling. She whispered to herself, 41 years. Let's see how much of it was real. The first light crept over Portland, a thin ribbon of gold against wet rooftops. Inside Hale Sourdough, ovens roared to life. Maggie's hands moved automatically, flour salt water fold press. The rhythm steadied her pulse. It was the only thing that still obeyed her. She glanced at the framed photo above the counter, Edward, 20 years younger, dusted in flour, laughing beside her. A lie trapped in glass. The bell above the door chimed, breaking the quiet. "Morning," Mom said Riley, still in his fire department jacket, hair damp from the drizzle. His smile was easy, unguarded. "You're up early," Maggie said, forcing a grin. "Station breakfast ran out again." He sniffed the air. "Sourdough always saves the day." She handed him a warm loaf. "You'll spoil your team. That's the plan." He bit into the crust, then looked at her face. "You okay? You look tired." Maggie's hand froze mid-wipe. "Just the rain," she said softly. "It keeps me up." Riley kissed her cheek. "Get some rest, okay? Don't let Dad's business dinners worry you. You've done enough for both of you." She smiled again, but this time it cracked. "I'll try." When the door closed behind him, silence folded back in. Maggie leaned on the counter, heart aching at his innocence. The oven beeped. The timer on her phone glowed beneath Kira's name. Tracking begins tonight. The dough had risen perfectly. So had her resolve. Night slid over Portland, like dark velvet. Maggie sat alone in her kitchen tea, untouched, the smell of baked bread still clinging to her hair. The city outside hummed softly. Distant tires' low thunder, a siren far away. She stared at her phone, waiting for something she both dreaded and demanded. At 9:47 p.m., it buzzed. "Kira Moss, I found him." A link followed. Maggie hesitated, her thumb trembling before she pressed play. The video opened with a shaky zoom across the rain-slicked patio of the Riverside Ember Resort. Candlelight, jazz. Edward Hale, her Edward, sitting across from a woman in a black coat. He leaned close, laughing, brushing her hand. Maggie leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The woman's hair caught the light, a familiar chestnut brown soft curls falling past her shoulders. The camera panned closer. She turned her head just enough for Maggie's heart to stop. Alyssa, her son's wife, Riley's wife. Maggie's breath left her body in a shudder. The air grew heavy, pressing against her ribs. She replayed the clip, searching for some mistake, bad angle trick, of light coincidence. But when Edward reached across the table and tucked a strand of Alyssa's hair behind her ear, the truth became unmovable. 41 years of marriage cracked in silence. Kira's message blinked again. "There's more. Follow up tomorrow." "I'm sorry." Maggie didn't reply. Her eyes stayed on the screen, watching her husband tilt his head toward the woman she had once called daughter. The camera shook slightly as Kira followed them toward a balcony framed by fairy lights. There, under the soft shimmer of river reflections, Edward placed his hand at the small of Alyssa's back. They leaned in, faces close, sharing a laugh that sounded like betrayal. Maggie's teacup slipped from her hand, shattering against the tile. She didn't flinch. The sound felt right, something breaking that needed to. She sat perfectly still, letting the light from the phone wash over her face. Every breath was a blade. Then she whispered, low and raw, "You chose the wrong woman to underestimate Ed." Outside, the Willamette wind howled, carrying the faint smell of rain and river smoke. Maggie wiped her eyes, not to hide tears, but to clear her aim. Tomorrow, she would know everything. The next morning smelled of wet earth and burnt toast. Maggie hadn't slept. She drove downtown before sunrise, fog curling along the empty streets like ghosts of the night before. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Harriet Klein looked up from her desk as Maggie entered. "You got something." Without a word, Maggie slid her phone across the table. The frozen frame of Edward and Alyssa on the balcony glowed between them. Harriet's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Oh my God." "Maggie." "Don't say it," Maggie interrupted, voice flat. "Just help me make sure I don't lose the bakery too." Harriet exhaled slowly, then reached for her laptop. "I ran a routine background check after you called yesterday," she said. "Edward filed a preliminary transfer request with the State Business Registry. He's trying to move Hale Sourdough under a new holding company." Maggie's pulse spiked. Whose name? Harriet turned the screen toward her. The document was clear: Alyssa Whitmore Hale, listed as managing partner. For a long moment, only the faint hum of the computer filled the room. Then Maggie spoke low and precise. "He's giving her my life's work." Harriet nodded grimly. The paperwork isn't finalized yet. We can freeze the filing with an injunction, but we need evidence of intent emails, phone logs, anything that shows collusion. Maggie's eyes hardened. Kira's already gathering that. She straightened her coat, and added 40 years of marriage, and he never learned one thing about me, Harriet. What's that? I don't crumble under heat. I rise. Outside, the drizzle had turned to steady rain. Maggie stepped into it, without an umbrella, letting it soak her hair, her coat, her fear. The bakery sign across town still flickered dimly in her mind. Her name, her legacy, her war. That night, the city was half drowned in mist. Maggie sat by the kitchen window, watching the bakery's neon sign blink faintly through the rain. Her phone vibrated on the counter. Kira Moss audio file. Recorded 8:42 p.m. Parking lot, Riverside Ember Resort. Maggie plugged in her earbuds, pressed play, and braced herself. Static first. Then Edward's familiar voice, steady, careful, the tone he used in business meetings. We can't wait too long. If she suspects anything, she'll move the assets. A woman's laugh followed, light, confident. Alyssa. Relax, Dad. I've already talked to the notary. He owes me a favor. All he needs is your signature and the new EIN number. Edward's sigh came through, slow and tired. She's sentimental, not stupid. We do this wrong, she'll see through it. Then keep acting like the loyal husband, Alyssa whispered, her voice turning soft, almost mocking. You've been doing it for decades. A pause. A faint sound, maybe a kiss. Maybe betrayal itself. Maggie's hand shook as she paused the recording. Her reflection in the window looked like another woman, entirely older, sharper, forged in disbelief. She hit play again. Once it's done, Alyssa said, we'll take over operations. Riley's too naive to question it. He'll just think we're expanding. And Maggie, she'll still be baking. For us. Maggie ripped out the earbuds. Her breath came in ragged bursts. The word us rang like a gunshot. Her gaze fell on the wooden photo frame beside the counter. Riley and Alyssa on their wedding day, all smiles and sunlight. She turned it face down, the glass clinking softly against the marble. She reopened Kira's message. More proof coming. Suggest securing financial accounts immediately. Trust no one. Maggie typed back one line. Thank you. You'll get your bonus when they get what they deserve. Outside, thunder rolled low over the Willamette, echoing her pulse. She opened her laptop, logged into the bakery's system, and changed every password. One by one, she sealed every door Edward thought was open. Then she whispered into the storm. You wanted a game, Alyssa. Let's play. The kitchen smelled of roasted turkey and rosemary comfort that felt counterfeit. Maggie set the table with quiet precision, each fork and plate perfectly aligned. Edward had texted that morning. Let's have dinner together tonight. Just us. The words read like a trap, disguised as nostalgia. When he walked in, his hair was damp from the rain, his voice calm, rehearsed. You cooked? Smells like Thanksgiving came early. Maggie smiled faintly. Old habits. They die hard. He poured himself a glass of wine, the same Cabernet he'd shared at the resort. I was thinking we could go over a few business papers later, some new partnership forms for Hale Sourdough, just signatures, routine stuff. She felt the pulse in her neck tighten. Partnership, she echoed. He waved dismissively, sipping the wine. You know how it is. Expansion. You've built something great, Maggie. I just want to help it grow. Inside her blouse, just beneath the collar, a tiny recorder blinked red. Kira had lent it to her that morning. If he brings up documents, she'd said get it on tape. Maggie's smile never wavered. You always did love numbers more than ovens. Edward chuckled. Well, someone has to handle the boring side while you make magic. His phone buzzed on the counter. He reached to silence it. The screen flashed briefly. Alyssa Whitmore. Maggie's hand froze midair. Edward turned the phone over, quickly pretending not to notice. Work, he muttered. Of course, she replied, her voice even colder than the rain outside. The front door opened then, and Riley stepped in, cheeks flushed from the November chill. Hey, folks, smells amazing in here. Edward's smile tightened. Didn't expect you tonight, son. Just finished my shift, Riley said, hugging Maggie. Mom, this looks incredible. She touched his face softly. Sit down, sweetheart. We're just talking business. Riley laughed. Business between you two, that never ends well. Edward forced a laugh, but his fingers fidgeted against the tablecloth. The recorder caught every breath. When they sat down, Maggie poured wine for all three. To family, she said, lifting her glass. And to truth, may it always rise to the surface. Edward hesitated, then clinked his glass with hers. To family. For a long minute, silence settled again, thick, watchful. Riley broke it first. So, Dad, these new papers you mentioned. Anything I should know about? Edward's face twitched. Nothing that concerns the fire department. Maggie smiled faintly. Actually, Riley, I'd love for you to stop by the bakery tomorrow. I think you'll find some interesting changes. Riley looked between them, puzzled. Sure, Mom. Whatever you need. Edward stood abruptly, carrying his plate to the sink. I've got a call to make. When he left the room, Maggie slipped the recorder from under her collar and stopped the tape. Her fingers shook, not from fear, but from restraint. She whispered to herself, Now I've got you, Ed. The front door closed. Outside, wind swept through the dark trees, carrying the faintest scent of violet. The morning began like any other, rain dripping off the eaves, sourdough, proofing under linen cloths, the air thick with yeast and cinnamon. Maggie rolled dough on the counter, her muscles remembering the motions long after her heart had forgotten peace. Then came the pop, a sharp hiss, the smell of oil. She spun just as the pot on the stove burst into a sheet of orange. Grease fire, fast, vicious. Maggie yanked a towel, smothered it, but the smoke rolled upward, turning the kitchen into a dim gray blur. She coughed, stumbled back. Damn it! The alarms shrieked. The sound was shrill enough to rattle glass. Across the street, Mrs. Lanning, the neighbor, looked out her window and screamed, Fire call, 911. Within minutes, Cedar Street pulsed with sirens. Maggie backed away from the spreading smoke, heart pounding. She threw open the back door for air. Flames licked the cabinets, curling them into black. This can't be how it ends, she thought. Not my house. Not today. She grabbed the fire blanket, tried again. A rush of heat pushed her back, nearly knocking her off her feet. Then distant but growing engine rumble, heavy boots on wet pavement. A voice through a bullhorn. Engine 5. Let's move. Check the main floor first. Maggie froze. That voice. Riley. The front door splintered under a metal ram. Firefighters poured in through the haze. We've got active flames in the kitchen, one shouted. Riley's silhouette appeared through the smoke visor, down hose in hand. Clear a path. Mom. She stepped out from the hallway, face streaked with soot. I'm here? He rushed to her, guided her toward the porch as two others blasted the fire with foam. The hiss of suppression filled the air. When they emerged, neighbors crowded in their raincoats, phones raised. Maggie collapsed into a chair, coughing but steady. Riley knelt beside her, eyes frantic. Are you hurt? I'm fine, she rasped. Kitchen's worse than I am. Behind them, firefighters shouted updates. Containment in progress. Smoke's venting through the attic. Riley took off his helmet, revealing sweat and ash. What happened? Just a mistake. Maggie lied. Oil spill. He nodded, still catching his breath, then glanced toward the driveway and stopped cold. A black SUV. Edwards. Parked, crooked engine still warm. Riley frowned. Is Dad here? Maggie's lips parted, but no sound came. Then, as if on cue, the front door creaked again. Two firefighters stepped aside. Edward Hale stumbled into view, shirt half-buttoned, face pale, and beside him, Alyssa. Her hair was tangled. Jacket zipped backward, eyes wild. The street went silent. Riley stood up slowly. Alyssa. His voice cracked on her name. What? What are you doing here? Alyssa froze. Edward tried to speak, first voice hoarse. Riley, it's not. But the words died under the weight of the scene: his own car, his disheveled clothes, his daughter-in-law's trembling silence. Mrs. Lanning gasped. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Riley looked from his wife to his father, then to his mother. Maggie, soot-streaked, standing in the doorway with eyes like sharpened stone. "Say it," he whispered. "Tell me this isn't what it looks like." No one spoke. The rain began again, hard and cold. Edward took one step forward. "Riley, son, Riley raised a gloved hand. Don't call me that." The firefighters shifted awkwardly, glancing between them. The captain approached Riley quietly. "Chief, we've got it contained. No major damage." Riley nodded absently, still staring at Alyssa. "Take my gear," he murmured, handing off his helmet. His eyes never left them. Alyssa finally broke. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Maggie's voice sliced through the downpour. "No, darling, it wasn't supposed to happen at all." Cameras clicked, neighbors recording whispers, spreading faster than the smoke. The perfect family on Cedar Street, undone in daylight. Riley turned away, fists trembling. "I can't," he muttered, and walked toward the truck, disappearing into the haze. Maggie stood still, rain washing streaks of ash from her face. Edward stepped closer, desperate. "Maggie, listen, don't." Her voice was quiet, final. "I've listened to you for 40 years. Now the whole street can listen instead." From somewhere nearby, a phone chimed. Kira's message appeared on Maggie's screen. "Everything's recorded. Audio-video eyewitnesses. It's over." Maggie exhaled long and steady, watching the rain swallow her house in silver smoke. The bakery could be rebuilt. The truth already had burned. She whispered, "Goodbye, Cedar Street." And when Riley looked back once from the fire truck, their eyes met mother and son, bound by ruin and revelation. The sirens faded, leaving only the rain and the smell of something finally finished. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and shame. White corridors hummed with quiet judgment. Whispers rippled like static wherever Maggie passed. Nurses pretended not to stare, but they all knew. Portland had a new story, now the fire chief's wife, the cheating husband, the daughter-in-law caught in smoke and sin. Maggie walked calmly down the hallway, soot washed from her face, her hair still damp from the storm. Her heels clicked against the linoleum, slow, deliberate, the sound of a verdict approaching. At the end of the hall, a police officer stood guard outside a curtained room. "Family. Only he said." She gave a thin smile. "I built that family. That counts." Inside, Edward sat on the edge of a hospital bed, shirtless under the white sheet, an IV in his arm. Alyssa lay 2 beds away, oxygen tube under her nose, eyes swollen from tears she hadn't earned. Both flinched when Maggie entered. "You shouldn't be here," Edward started, voice cracking. "Neither should you," Maggie replied, "especially not in her bed." The silence that followed was sterile, suffocating. Machines beeped in rhythm with their guilt. Alyssa turned her face toward the wall. Edward tried to stand, but winced. "It's not what you think." Maggie's eyes didn't move from him. "You'll have to be more specific. I think you betrayed your wife, your son, and your own bloodline in one night." "Which part's wrong?" He swallowed, hard veins twitching at his temples. It was a mistake. It just happened. Her lips curved faintly. 41 years, Ed. You don't just trip and fall into your son's wife." A nurse peeked in, saw Maggie's face, and quietly backed out. Alyssa finally whispered, voice trembling, "Please, Maggie." "I didn't mean for this, don't use my name," Maggie snapped. "You don't deserve to taste it." Alyssa's eyes flooded again. "I'm sorry." "No," Maggie said softly. "You're scared. That's not the same thing." She reached into her coat pocket and laid a thick envelope on the table between them. Inside are printed photos, screenshots, emails, bank logs, and a transcript from a private investigator. "You two have been very industrious." Edward's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You had me followed," Maggie tilted her head. "I had you recorded, documented, and cross-referenced. You taught me bookkeeping, remember?" He looked away, jaw tight. "You'll ruin us." She leaned closer, voice low enough that only he could hear. "You already did." From outside the room came the muffled buzz of a crowd. Reporters had gathered near the ER exit, neighbors, vloggers, gossip journalists, sniffing the trail of scandal. A few photos had already leaked online. The title trended before noon: Father-in-law and daughter-in-law caught in fire scandal on Cedar Street. Riley hadn't shown up. Maggie suspected he couldn't bear it yet. When he finally called, his voice over the phone was hollow. "Mom, I need a few days. I can't look at either of them. Take all the time you need," she'd said. "Just don't blame yourself." Now she looked at Alyssa, whose makeup had streaked into bruised lines. "Did you ever love my son?" Alyssa hesitated, and that second of silence was enough. Maggie nodded. "I thought so." She turned toward the nurse's desk, took 2 medical release forms, and handed one to Edward. "You'll sign these. You leave the hospital in my car, go straight to the courthouse. Harriet's waiting. You're signing away every share of Hale sourdough." Edward's voice rose brittle. "You can't just Maggie cut him off. I can. And I will. Because while you were busy rolling in deceit, I was busy locking down the trademarks, the accounts, and the deed to this house you pretended was ours. It's mine now. Legally." His face drained of color. Alyssa tried to sit up, panicking. "He told me it was already transferred." "Oh, it was," Maggie said coldly. "To my name." Edward slumped back against the bed, defeated. She turned toward Alyssa. "You'll get a lawyer, preferably one who specializes in restraining orders, because that's all you'll need from me." The door creaked open behind her. Riley stood there in uniform, eyes rimmed red, exhaustion etched deep. For a moment, the world held its breath. "Mom," he said quietly, "they need to stay under supervision tonight. No press allowed." "I know," she replied. "I'm not the one who set the fire this time." He swallowed hard. "It was an accident, right?" She looked at him long and steady. "Yes, son. But not all accidents are regrets." Riley nodded slowly, understanding something without wanting to. Then he turned to his father. "You disgust me." Edward tried to speak, but Riley stepped back before the words could reach him. "You taught me how to put out fires," he said. "Never thought I'd need that lesson for my own family." When he left, the door swung shut with a quiet finality. Maggie gathered the signed forms from the tray, tucking them into her folder. "Rest well," she said. "Tomorrow, the lawyers start baking." As she walked down the hall, every step echoed like a gavel strike. Nurses whispered again, admiration now mingled with fear. Outside, rain turned the parking lot into a mirror. The flashing ambulance lights smeared across the puddles like brushstrokes of red and blue. Maggie paused. Beneath the awning, breathed in the cold air and whispered to herself, "The truth didn't just burn my house. It cleansed it." Then she walked into the rain, no umbrella, carrying her folder. The recipe for justice tucked tight beneath her arm. Rain still licked the courthouse steps when Maggie walked in, with Harriet Klein at her side. The marble floor gleamed like ice under fluorescent lights. Reporters lined the entrance, microphones raised, but Harriet's tone cut through the noise. "No questions today. Mrs. Hale will speak when justice does." Inside, the world shifted from gossip to procedure. The clerk stamped a thick file petition for divorce asset freeze and injunction of transfer. Maggie A. Hale versus Edward L. Hale. Each thud of the stamp felt like another nail sealing 40 years of deceit. Maggie's hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. Harriet whispered, "Once this is filed, Edward can't touch a cent. And Alyssa's name will be red flagged in all state registries." "Good," Maggie replied. "Let them both learn what hunger tastes like." The courthouse clock struck noon as they stepped back into the drizzle. Across the street, a cluster of journalists shouted, "Mrs. Hale, are the rumors true? Was your son's wife involved?" Maggie turned her head slightly, eyes calm, but razor sharp. "The truth doesn't need me to tell it," she said. "It's already speaking loud enough." By evening, the local news carried her face, "Portland Baker Exposes." Family betrayal and corporate fraud. The anchor called her a symbol of quiet strength. Orders at Hale Sourdough doubled overnight. The public loved the story of a woman who rose from ashes literally. But not everyone felt triumph. Riley watched the broadcast alone from his apartment, still in uniform, a half-eaten sandwich untouched beside him. Each clip hit him like a hammer, his father escorted by police for questioning Alyssa's blurred photo beside the words "ongoing investigation." He didn't cry. Not yet. He simply sat there chest hollow as the phone rang. It was Maggie. "Hey, Mom," he said quietly. "I need to see you," she replied. "At the bakery. Tonight." When Riley arrived, the smell of cinnamon and flour wrapped around him like an old song. Maggie was behind the counter, sleeves rolled, sorting paperwork into neat piles. "Mom," he began, "the guys at the station. They know. Everyone knows. I can't even—" She stepped around the counter and hugged him tight. For the first time since the fire, she let her hands shake. "I'm so sorry, baby. I didn't want you to find out like that." Riley's voice cracked. "You knew before the fire, didn't you?" "Yes, and you didn't tell me." She looked up, tears balanced but unshed. "If I had, you would have tried to protect them, and they would have used that." He stepped back, hurt, flashing across his face. "You think I'm that naive?" "No," she said softly. "I think you're good. And good people get destroyed when they don't see evil coming." For a moment, the only sound was the rain hitting the windows. Then Riley noticed a folder on the table labeled "Loan Documents, Portland First Bank." "What's this?" he asked, flipping it open. His jaw tightened as he scanned the pages. "No. This is my name." Maggie nodded grimly. "They used your firefighter ID to secure a $75,000 loan for expansion capital. Harriet found it this morning. Signatures forged, notary bribed." Riley stared at the paper. His father's handwriting imperfectly imitated, but close enough to fool a bank. Alyssa's name signed as co-borrower. "He used me." His voice broke into something between disbelief and fury. "He used my credit. My record." Maggie reached for his arm. "They wanted to tie the business debt to you, so when they took over, I'd be left bankrupt and you buried." Riley's breath came fast. "That's identity fraud, Mom. That's a federal offense." "Yes. Harriet's filing it tomorrow." He dropped into a chair, face in his hands. "All these years, I thought he was the man I wanted to become." Maggie crouched beside him, her voice trembling now. "You don't have to inherit his sins, Riley. You're nothing like him." He looked up, eyes red. "You think I can forgive that I think you can survive it?" She stood, pressing the back of her hand against her lips to steady herself. "Listen to me. Tomorrow I'll make a public statement. After that, there'll be cameras, lawyers, and vultures. You don't owe them your face. Stay away from all of it until this is over." Riley rose slowly. "You're not alone in this. I'm not running from our name. You built it. I'll protect it." Maggie tried to smile, but grief pulled at the corners. "You already did." "That day on Cedar Street, you saved what mattered." He looked toward the bakery window, where the neon sign flickered, "Hale Sourdough, since 1985. The word Hale glowed unevenly, the E half burned from smoke damage. Riley pointed. "Maybe it's time we change that." Maggie followed his gaze. "Maybe," she whispered, "or maybe we let it burn as a reminder." Thunder rolled outside, the kind that makes the world hold its breath. Riley exhaled. "He'll try to reach out, you know." "I know. What will you say when he does?" Maggie wiped her hands on her apron, eyes hard as cooling steel. "Nothing. Some fires you don't put out, you just make sure they never spread again." He nodded, understanding at last that his mother wasn't just surviving, she was rebuilding. They stood together as rain pattered against the glass, the ovens glowing softly behind them. The smell of bread rose again, warm, real, alive. For the first time in months, Maggie smiled.
We open at 7 tomorrow, she said.
You'll help me knead. Riley nodded. Always. And as he turned off the neon light for the night, only the word RISE reflected faintly in the wet window pane part, accident part prophecy. 2 weeks later, Portland had turned Maggie Hale into a headline. The woman who burned the lie and baked the truth. Reporters waited outside Hale's sourdough every morning, cameras fogged with drizzle hoping for a quote. Maggie never stopped to speak. She let the bread do the talking. But Edward did. One evening, the television above the bakery counter flickered to life. Edward's face filled the screen, pale, unshaven performing contrition for a hungry audience. I've made terrible mistakes, he said, voice trembling. My family deserves forgiveness. Maggie was always the heart of our business. I just lost my way. Maggie stood behind the counter, flour dust on her apron, jaw clenched. Harriet appeared beside her, holding up a phone. He's trying to reset the narrative, she muttered. You ready? Maggie nodded. Play it. The phone's speaker hissed before Kira's recorded audio spilled into the bakery's quiet Alyssa's voice. The notary's ready. Once the papers are signed, Maggie's out. Edward's reply. Good. We'll keep her name for branding. No one will know. The clip went viral before midnight. Every news site carried it. Confession audio contradicts Edward Hale's apology. Maggie didn't gloat. She just wiped the counter, humming softly, while customers whispered her name with awe. By morning, Edward's PR team had resigned. Alyssa's social accounts vanished. The bakery's online orders tripled. And for the first time, Maggie didn't feel like she was surviving, she was commanding. When Riley came by for coffee, he grinned. You just declared war on national TV. She poured him a cup. No honey, she said calmly. I declared peace with myself. Outside, the dawn cracked open, painting the wet street gold. Maggie looked out through the window, the reflection of the ovens burning steady behind her, and whispered, finally, light that doesn't hurt. The park smelled of wet cedar and old promises. Maggie stood beneath the same oak where Edward had once knelt. 40 years ago, the ring still on her hand, but her heart long gone. Rain shimmered on the bench beside her as Harriet and Kira waited a few steps back, silent sentinels in black coats. Edward arrived late, limping, his eyes sunken. Maggie, he breathed, voice shaking, you didn't have to do this. We can fix it. She studied him, this man, who had once been laughter and sunlight, now hollowed by his own lies. You stole my name, my work, my son's peace, she said. What's left to fix? He reached into his coat pocket. Harriet tensed. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a single paper knife, the silver one Maggie had given him on their 10th anniversary. I just wanted to return it, he said weakly. Maybe we could. Maggie cut him off, handing him a folded document instead. That's a restraining order, effective immediately. You'll have your lawyer, and I'll have the rest of my life. Kira stepped forward, voice cold. You're also under investigation for financial fraud, Mr. Hale. Don't leave the state. Edward's shoulders sagged. You're enjoying this, he muttered. No, Maggie said softly. I'm ending it. She turned to leave, the rain glinting like mercury in her hair. Behind her, Edward stood alone, one hand clutching the paper knife, the other gripping his chest, as if trying to hold on to what was already gone. Harriet opened an umbrella over Maggie. You okay? Maggie's smile was faint, but real. Better than fine, she said. I'm free. The grand opening smelled like hope and warm bread. A new sign gleamed above the window, R&M Artisan Bakery, short for Riley and Maggie. Gone was the old Hale logo, the name that had carried both legacy and betrayal. In its place stood something honest. Riley adjusted his firefighter jacket before stepping inside, cheeks flushed with pride. It's strange, he said. Same ovens, same recipes, but it feels like a different place. Maggie smiled, wiping flour from her hands. Because this one was built without lies. Customers filled the shop, drawn by the story they all knew by heart, the woman who rose from fire, and the son who stood beside her. The cash register rang like applause. When the last batch came out golden, Maggie nodded toward the front door. "You should flip the sign, sweetheart. Let the world in." Riley turned it from closed to open sunlight, catching the glass like a blessing. For a heartbeat, he looked just like the boy who once carried flour sacks bigger than himself. He came back to the counter and hugged her tightly. "You did it, Mom." "No," she whispered, pressing her hand to his heart. "We did." Outside, the line grew. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon, second chances, and peace. And as Maggie glanced up at the glowing letters R&M, she felt the quiet joy of something finally reborn. The cameras rolled lights bright enough to sting. Maggie sat behind the bakery counter, calm hands folded. The reporter, a young woman barely 30, smiled nervously. "Mrs. Hale America sees you as a symbol of strength. But if you could speak to your ex-husband right now, what would you say?" For a heartbeat, the room went silent, except for the hum of the ovens. Maggie's eyes drifted toward the window, where rain had begun to fall again, soft, cleansing, familiar. She spoke slowly, her voice even, but edged with steel. "I'd tell him thank you. Because he taught me that love without respect is just slow poison. He took everything he could burn, and what survived was me." The reporter swallowed hard. "So you don't hate him?" Maggie smiled faintly. "No. Hate's heavy. I prefer to travel light." A murmur rippled through the crew. The producer signaled cut, but Maggie wasn't finished. She leaned closer to the mic. To any woman watching this, she said, "You don't have to stay in a burning house to prove you're loyal. Walk out even if your hands are shaking. The world is wide, and the air outside is yours." Silence. Then quiet applause from behind the camera. The interview aired that night, titled "The Woman Who Chose: Fire Over Silence." Within hours, it went viral. Millions of shares, thousands of women quoting her words. Riley watched from the kitchen, eyes shining. "You didn't just rebuild a bakery, Mom," he said softly. "You started a revolution." Maggie turned off the TV, smiling through tears. "No, baby. I just opened the windows." Night settled heavy over Portland, the kind that blurs streetlights into ghosts. Kira Moss sat in her car, outside a dingy motel near the interstate, her laptop screen glowing pale blue. A notification blinked: wire transfer $42,000 from Edward L. Hale to Alyssa Whitmore. Timestamp 2 hours ago. She picked up her phone. "Harriet, it's Moss. He's trying to run." Minutes later, police cruisers rolled into the parking lot, their red and blue strobes cutting through the fog. Inside room 107, Edward stuffed papers into a suitcase passport burner phone, cash wrapped in rubber bands. On the nightstand lay a faded photo of him and Maggie back when laughter came easily. He hesitated, thumb brushing her smile. Then the knock came. "Mr. Hale, Portland PD. Open the door." He froze. The second knock was louder. "Edward Hale, you're under investigation for wire fraud, forgery, and obstruction of justice. Open it now." When the door burst open, he didn't fight. He simply sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the photo as the cuffs clicked shut. "Guess she really did win," he murmured. Kira watched from the hallway, arms crossed. "No, Mr. Hale," she said quietly. "She just stopped losing." At dawn, Maggie stood at her bakery window as police lights flickered faintly across the wet horizon. Harriet called. They got him, caught mid-transfer. Maggie closed her eyes, exhaling the breath she hadn't realized she'd held for months. "Good," she said softly. "Let the past pay its own debt." She hung up, wiped the condensation from the glass, and flipped the open sign. The smell of fresh bread filled the air again, warm, forgiving, alive. Somewhere out there, the last ember of her old life went dark, and Maggie Hale at last began to truly rise. The envelope came on a gray morning, thin and official, marked Oregon Department of Corrections. Maggie turned it over twice before opening it, the paper trembling faintly in her hands. Inside, 2 pages of uneven handwriting. The first words froze her breath. "Dear Riley." It wasn't addressed to her. She sat by the window, steam curling from her untouched coffee, and began to read. "I don't expect forgiveness. Prison is quiet, and quiet makes you think.
I thought I loved your father because he gave me attention. Truth is, I loved what he could take from your mother, her strength, her calm, her certainty. I envied what I could never be. Tell Maggie I'm sorry, but don't let her waste forgiveness on me. Tell her she was right. The fire only burned what deserved to burn. If you can, Riley, live different. Don't become either of us. Alyssa Cell, 2014. Maggie folded the letter slowly, eyes distant. Through the bakery glass, the world moved on customers' laughing delivery trucks, rumbling by the scent of cinnamon rolling through the air. When Riley arrived later that morning, she handed him the envelope. It's for you, she said simply. He read it in silence, jaw tight, then placed it back on the counter. She finally told the truth, he murmured. Maggie nodded. A little late, but the truth always finds light. Riley looked at her. What will you do with it? Keep it, she said. Not as forgiveness, as proof. He frowned. Proof of what? That I was right to walk away. Outside, the first rays of sunlight slipped through the clouds, warming the bakery window. Maggie turned toward the ovens, whispering, Every lie leaves ashes, but ashes can grow flowers if you stop breathing smoke. And for the first time, Riley smiled. The ballroom shimmered with soft gold light. Hundreds of women filled the rows, teachers, nurses, single mothers, survivors, all gathered for the Oregon Women's Strength Summit. Maggie stood behind the podium, wearing a simple navy dress and a silver locket shaped like a wheat stalk. Her hands no longer shook. Harriet watched from the front row. Riley stood near the door, proud and still. The moderator introduced her, A. Baker, a mother and a woman who turned betrayal into rebirth, Mrs. Maggie Hale. Applause rose like a tide. Maggie smiled, adjusted the microphone, and began. They say, fire destroys, she said softly. But I learned it reveals. It strips away everything false until you see what's real. I once lived inside a lie so beautiful, I thought it was love. And when it burned, I thought I'd die with it. But I didn't. I baked bread. Laughter rippled gently through the room. I needed grief until it became purpose, she continued. I learned that healing isn't polite, it's messy, loud, and smells like something new rising from the oven. And if any woman here has been told she's too old, too soft, too late, remember this dough only rises after it's been punched down. The audience stirred, a few clapping through tears. Maggie's voice grew quieter. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's refusing to carry someone else's fire any longer.
I forgave not to free them, but to free myself. Silence filled the room, thick with emotion. Then, like a wave breaking, everyone stood. Applause thundered. Riley clapped, hardest eyes glistening. Harriet whispered, She did it. Maggie stepped back from the microphone, heart steady, and whispered to herself, Finally, the world smells like bread again. Above her, the stage lights glowed warm and golden, like sunrise through bakery glass. The house was quiet when the phone rang. Outside, twilight spilled through the rain, soft and silver. Maggie wiped flour from her hands and answered. Mrs. Hale. The voice on the line was calm, official. This is Officer Daniels from Multnomah County Corrections. I'm calling to inform you Edward Hale passed away tonight. Cardiac arrest. He was found in his cell around 6:20 p.m. Maggie stood still, the world narrowing to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking wall clock. Was he alone? Yes, ma'am. Peaceful, from what we can tell. Thank you, she said quietly. That'll be all. When she hung up, she didn't cry. She just stood there listening to the rain tapping gently against the window, like an old friend keeping time. On the counter sat a single loaf cooling on the rack, golden, perfect, still steaming. She sliced it in half, laid one piece on a plate, and whispered, 41 years. You finally stopped running. She lit a small candle beside the bread, not for mourning, but for closure. The flame danced steady, reflected in the kitchen glass. Riley came in a few minutes later, reading her face instantly. It's Dad, isn't it? Maggie nodded. He reached for her hand, and together they stood in silence. No tears, no anger, just quiet release. After a while, she exhaled and said softly, "Let's eat while it's warm. Tomorrow's still coming." They sat together at the small wooden table, the candle flickering between them, the air smelling of peace and fresh bread, like forgiveness, finally baked through.
Dawn broke soft over Cedar Street, the kind of pale gold morning that seemed to forgive everything it touched. Maggie stepped out onto the porch, barefoot, a mug of coffee cradled in her hands. The air smelled like wet pine and warm earth. For the first time in years, her chest felt light. The world was quiet, except for birdsong and the faint hum of the bakery ovens coming to life. Inside, Riley moved about, whistling off-key, preparing the morning batch. The sound made her smile. She looked toward the horizon where the clouds were thinning, streaked with rose and amber. 41 years, she thought. It took me that long to finally wake up. On the porch railing sat the newspaper headline, bold Portland's Phoenix, the woman who turned betrayal into strength. Maggie traced the letters absently, then folded the paper away. Titles, scandals, forgiveness. None of it mattered now. What mattered was the smell of yeast, the clink of coffee mugs, the sound of her son laughing again. Riley stepped out beside her apron, dusted in flour. "The first batch is perfect," he said proudly. "I knew it would be," Maggie replied. He looked at her with gentle curiosity. "Do you miss him?" She took a long sip of coffee, watching steam curl into the morning light. "No," she said softly. "I miss who I thought he was. But I don't grieve ghosts anymore." They stood there together, listening to the city waking. Across the street, the neighbors waved. Children biked past, chasing puddles. Life, stubborn, ordinary, beautiful, had returned. Maggie leaned against the railing, voice barely above a whisper. "People think strength means never breaking," she said. "But real strength is how you rebuild when you do." Riley smiled. "You rebuilt everything, Mom." She shook her head gently. "Not everything, just enough." A soft breeze carried the scent of fresh bread through the open door. Maggie closed her eyes, letting it wrap around her like a benediction. "Fire took the house," she whispered, "but it gave me light." As the sun climbed higher, glinting across the bakery sign, R&M Rise and Mend, Maggie turned to her son and smiled. "Come on," she said. "Let's start the day. We've got people to feed." And with that, she walked back inside, the bell above the bakery door, ringing clear and bright like an ending that had finally found peace. How did this story touch you? Tell us in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. If it moved your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Tap the so you won't miss our next emotional story. And before you go, click on the end screen to discover more powerful, heartwarming tales waiting just for you. See you in the next story.